Hello, everybody, and welcome to this next episode in, I don't know if we're going to call it Cricket Fit Podcast. It's kind of a podcast style series. Welcome to Carl Petersen from New Zealand. This is obviously the second time we've done this. First up, we did a session with Sibby Walter around shoulder injuries in cricket, and now we've got Sibby's mentor, Carl Petersen. Have I frozen? Here I am. So, a little bit of introduction into who Carl is. So, I actually first came across Carl when I was studying and kept seeing this repeated name in the research, in the cricket research, and everything seemed to just be Petersen et al., Petersen et al. So, I was very, very aware of who he was and kind of looking at his research around a lot of stuff in fast bowling and workload management and GPS data. And then we've kind of connected, and Carl also, as well as kind of his research background, has a really good experience in the professional game as an S&C coach. And then, like I said, he's now supervising other researchers in the cricket kind of research space, such as Sibby. I will hand it over to Carl, who's going to talk about his background. And then is also going to share a load of tips that he can give to kind of amateur cricketers like you guys watching, that take the complicated research and all the hard years of work that goes into that and condense it down into actionable, simple advice for you guys into your games. Over to you, Carl.
Okay, thanks, Sam. So my background is I've always been interested in cricket. I think that started actually from an Englishman who lived next door to me. So growing up, I had a guy next door to me, a couple of years older than me, and he loved to bat. So basically I had to bowl to him on our front lawn, playing street cricket, and that's where I developed the love of the game. And so I sort of growing up, I wanted to be a fast bowler. And that's where my interest was. That's enjoyed going to school to play for the cricket team and things like that. So when it came to choosing a university, we lived a little bit out of town, so I was sort of having to relocate cities anyway. I remember looking at the classroom wall, and they had a list of all the universities and the list of degrees. And at the time, I grew up in Wellington in New Zealand. They seemed to have an older team, so it seemed to be a bit harder for young guys to crack into it. So I sort of had this idea of trying to give it a go, trying to make it down in Otago. So I chose the university first before I chose the degree, and then I looked down the list and I saw physical education, and I never did that at school, but I thought, well, might as well give that a go. And that's basically how I ended up getting down the road of into research and things. So doing a PE degree, I came across a sports scientist called Gordon Slevitt, who's no longer with us now, but he's a Canadian, very inspiring guy. He's a physiologist. He's working with a lot of athletes around acclimatisation. He really sparked my interest in physiology and fitness. So I tried to make it down there as a cricketer, and then as a backup, basically I thought, well, it wouldn't be too bad becoming a sports scientist. And at the time, I was looking at research papers, and there was papers on fast bowling injuries, but there was nothing on how to get faster, and that was my question I wanted to answer. How do you train a fast bowler? And really, there was absolutely nothing out there. I came across a study by Coop de Rennie, who's a researcher from the University of Hawaii on baseball studies on baseball, and it was using overweight and underweight cricket balls. So at the end of my undergrad, I still wasn't any closer to working out how to train a fast bowler. So I wanted to replicate Coop de Rennie's study on baseballers with cricketers. So ended up enrolling in a master's degree, and basically through that we ran a overweight underweight cricket training study with slightly overweight, slightly underweight, about 10 to 20% difference. So it's sort of subtle changes, and that got published. And I was fortunate enough to meet a professor down there, Professor Will Hopkins, who was great at stats, and I was terrible at stats. I think I repeated it a couple of times. So I asked him if he'd be my supervisor, and it was pretty much a master stroke because it turned out that he had an arrangement with AIS, Australian Institute of Sport, where he'd go over and help them with all their stats. And he had his own stats sites and stuff. He's a bit of a guru. And one thing led to another. So towards the end of my master's degree, it was a thesis-only master's doing this cricket project, a role came up that I just saw advertised at the Australian Institute of Sport for an internship role in the physiology department. And I happened to time my application for when Will was over there helping them out with their stats. And they asked Will, what's this guy like? And he just said, oh, he's okay. And that's all he said. I found this out later. But it was enough to get me an interview, and luckily enough, performed well enough to get the job. And that was just an amazing experience, because you come out of a university degree studying sports science, but not really knowing how to be a sports scientist and how they think and conduct research and things like that. So all of a sudden, a young 20-year-old, and you're working alongside the best in the business, the top sports scientists in the world, working with some of the best athletes in the world. And it's just an amazing experience. I think I worked with 28 different sports over there. So it really is a real eye-opener, and you just fast-track your career, your progress, being in that environment, really stimulating, passionate people, excellent advice. And and that's sort of basically how things started. And over there, they have senior physiologists that the interns would work with, and I was lucky enough to work with Professor David Pine, who worked with a lot of the cricketers, and also Professor Mark Portis, who undertook some of the early cricket research into injuries and biomechanics or fast bowlers. And then sort of fast forward probably 5 or 6 years later, I was working in Dublin, and I got an email saying basically there's a role coming up with Cricket Australia. We think you'll be good for it, and it's to do your PhD, basically follow all the state teams around the country, plus the T20 one day and test team, and use GPS devices to work out what they do, because we really had no idea what cricketers actually do. And to be able to provide that information to S&C coaches allows us to make training and more specific to the demands of what the game demands are. So, so I applied for the role, and I was interviewed for that, and they asked me. It was advertised as a GPS in cricket, and while you do it, you get your PhD. So it was a partnership between University of Western Australia. Sorry, what's that?
What year would that have been in?
This would be in 2007 I started. So 2007 to 2010. So
it was the same era as that great Australia side.
I was lucky enough to be able to see some of these guys that are household names for the next 10, 15 years. And actually, one of the studies I did was to look at the training demands and the game demands and match them up. So that involved basically spending about 3 months at the Australian Cricket Academy in Brisbane, and just following the guys and looking at all the training drills they do, and taking sweat samples and lactates and putting the GPS units on them. And the GPS units were very new at that time, and some of them were in-house developed and things like that. And so they gave a really good insight into the training demands of the players. And I remember one of the coaches there told me that every year he would write down from the academy side 3 names and put them in his drawer of who he thought would play for Australia in the next couple of years. And the requirement to get into the academy is sort of like an Australian C team. You're effectively potential players that are going to be playing for Australia in the next couple of years. And normally, you'd probably get, maybe 2 or 3 players would make the cut. And I mean, from that team there, I think there's about 8 or 9 of them that made the cut. So, and eventually played for Australia in different formats, and for very long careers, some of them. So
Awesome. And on the, because I think I'm pretty sure that the GPS stuff was where I first came across you, and definitely remember reading those stats and being a bit like, yes, it's like there's proof out there that cricket isn't just standing in a field. and like the distances covered, and especially like the sprinting is obviously not as high as maybe football or stuff like that, but there's a lot of high intensity running, and especially just general distance covered in a day is
Yeah.
pretty high if you think about it. So maybe, I don't know if you're going to go onto this in a later patch, but if not, cover now like what actually that research showed, and what you found around kind of the demands of the game, and then kind of position specific stuff as well.
Yeah, so I think it's important to put things into context as well. So with GPS units, you have different speed zones, and it's how you set the threshold, which is really important. So some of the rugby studies and stuff, I think early on had a sprint threshold of about 24, 25k an hour. So we originally looked at something like that, and would basically have the conclusion that cricketers don't sprint.
Yeah.
They weren't getting up to that level. But we know that the demands of a cricket fast bowler is some of the most explosive action in athletics, to be able to run in and then deliver a ball at a very high speed within a fraction of a second. So so we had to drop the speed band down. So I think we used a 20k an hour speed band to look at. We wanted to capture the running into the wicket, which is not at 100%, but it's a fairly decent run into the wicket for a lot of bowlers, depending if they're more shoulder dominant or getting more momentum through their run up.
Yeah.
And fast bowlers were sort of covering about 2k of sprinting activity in a day in some of these formats of the game, and some of them covering up to about 30k in total distance. 90% of that would be walking, but it's a lot of volume, especially when you got multiple days of cricket. And actually, after leaving Cricket Australia, so my contract was that as soon as I had my PhD and I'd finished, my role would be finished. So towards the end, I looked around for a role, and was lucky enough to get that role at Northampton.
Yeah.
And I was really keen to work with Northampton in the English county cricket system, because county cricket sort of got the reputation of being the most intensive form of cricket in terms of the number of days you play and the schedule and stuff. So so that extra volume of how those guys cope with those loads, and I think one of the reasons why cricketers might like golf so much is because it's time on feet.
Yeah.
And I think you can't beat time on feet, especially wearing spikes and stuff like that. And often would take them on a pre-season tour, or go somewhere like South Africa on a pre-season tour, and the pitches are really hard because it's their peak of their summer or something, or towards the end of their summer, and we're coming out of soft English grass conditions, and that's where you sort of maybe getting a lot of spikes and injuries with too much loading on the feet and the legs and stuff. So you've got to be very careful with how you build up the load of bowlers. So
I think also just taking that 30-kilometre number, like if you asked any walker to go out and walk 30 kilometres in a day, they're going to be tired, and it's like that's in a day of total distance, but with high intensity bursts, having to concentrate on where you're bowling, how you're bowling, what your field is, what's happening in the game, you're on, off, you're stopping. And it's a lot of work, and I think it's sometimes or often underappreciated how much actually goes into a day's play for any cricketer, but especially obviously fast bowlers.
Yeah, no, definitely. So so it's very important to look at the preparation methods of bowlers, and obviously a lot's gone into that in more recent years in terms of strength and conditioning coaches probably being more highly skilled and looking at their conditioning methods and things. So and that's exciting, and that's I've still got involvement now with supervising PhD students. I'm supervising sort of come full circle, supervising a PhD student who's a conditioning coach who's now looking at the strength demands of fast bowlers again. So
Awesome. And then do you want to speak about the other kind of key research you've done and move on to that and break it down into what kind of insights you can share for anyone watching this who whether they're a bowler or any other speciality in the game?
Yeah, sure. So actually coming back to the interview when I got the job with Cricket Australia, it was advertised as as a PhD with GPS in cricket. So I sort of knew you could pretty much work out from the advert what they were after, and they
Yeah.
were after looking at position-specific demands. So we looked at bowlers, batters, keepers, and spin bowlers, fast bowlers. And then also looking at levels of cricket, so academy level, state level, so first class level, and then international level as well. So sort of had this matrix that we made up. And then we had just basically had to look at how we'd go around the country to cover all these different games to try and fill up the data that we needed for that. So that's sort of one aspect of it. But then they also asked, well, what else could you bring to the role? And I knew at the time that Cricket Australia had struggled in India. That was in terms of anywhere in the world, that was the hardest place to win. So basically, I said to them, look, I mentioned that fact, and then I also said, look, I think it'd be quite nice to look at some of the environmental stuff in terms of how we acclimatise and acclimate players to go to India and play in India.
Yeah.
I think we had 10 studies published out of the PhD, and we did it. For those that sort of familiar with the PhD process, the traditional way of doing a PhD is to write up a big thesis. There's a Scandinavian model, which is an alternative way, which is to combine research papers that you've written and got published in academic journals. So we did that way. So we're sort of publishing as we're going. So I was writing up a lot of stuff in hotel rooms while I was collecting the data. And the study that I didn't get published, and it was because we didn't have enough control over it and from the environment, was an acclimation study. And so there was two parts to it. The first part is we acclimatised a lot of local bowlers in Brisbane. I think it was about 30 in total. We split them into a couple of groups, tried the different acclimatisation methods. And we actually had a heat tent in Brisbane underneath the stadium at Allan Border Fields. And so we had the players doing Tabata sessions on bikes. So they sort of 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off, repeated about 8 times and multiple sets of that in a tent with a water bath which got heated to provide the humidity and heaters to heat it up to Indian conditions.
Yeah.
So we did that study, and then we moved on to actually doing a study with the academy bowlers and actually all the academy cricketers actually. And we split them in half. So we did all the pre-testing in Brisbane in our heat tent under the stadium. And then we split the group in half, and Aaron Kellett, the conditioning coach, who later on became the Australian conditioning coach, he took half the academy guys through to Chennai. I think we were sponsored by Emirates at the time, so we had to go via Dubai or something. And then 4 days later, I followed up with the second half of the group after they did artificial acclimatisation in Brisbane. Mm-hmm. So we're comparing an artificial acclimatisation versus a natural acclimatisation.
Yeah.
And the reason why we chose 4 days was typically that was the amount of time that players would have to acclimatise before going on a tour. Often they're going from a tour to a tour. There's players are playing sort of 10 months a year when they get into the international teams. So it was only a very short time period, but it was because that was what sort of time period they might be able to have.
Yeah. And
they were just looking at whether they could fast track some of those adaptations. They were looking at different things like heart rate and how that decreases as you become at submax intensities as you become more acclimatized, and looking at your sweat rates. We measured sweat rates and sweat concentrations and things like that to see what we could sort of fast track and what we couldn't fast track. And so that was, I really enjoyed that study. But unfortunately that was the one that wasn't published because we were supposed to have the guys training in an air-conditioned gym in Chennai, and Aaron and I would ring each other every night to make sure that the training was replicated between the two groups. And the air conditioning wasn't working in Chennai, so it sort of threw the study out a little bit.
Yeah.
And then we post-tested everyone in Bangalore, so we sort of flew to Bangalore and
One question that popped into my head there, I know, and I've actually had this question from a few parents when their children have been going over to India or Asia for these kind of pre-season tours. And they say, is there anything they can do, and is there any truth or reason to to train wearing a bin bag? Because I know a lot of people, when they're trying to acclimatise and get used to those humid conditions, will whack a bin bag on to try and sweat more. Is that a load of rubbish? Is there any theory that backs that up? What's your opinion on that one?
Yeah, I haven't seen any studies on wearing bin bags.
Yeah,
There's probably more comfortable methods of doing it. I know it's probably I think you old boxing movies and stuff with guys doing that type of stuff.
yeah,
But yeah, so the idea is that you're acclimatizing yourself to more humid and more hot conditions. After I also had a stint at the New Zealand Academy of Sport, which was known at the time, before it became the High Performance Sport New Zealand. So we acclimatised an athlete before the Athens Games, para athlete, and we did it just in an office room, taping up the vents and stuff in the room with a water bath and heaters. So people can probably do that in the bathroom and stuff.
yeah,
You have to have some way of getting the intensity up. So you sort of have some ergometer or something, or like a treadmill or a bike. Bikes tend to be easier to wheel around and to be able to move into small spaces. You don't want large spaces because it takes too much to heat it up. But it's also important to look at the conditions that you're trying to acclimatise for.
yeah,
And whether they're hot humid or they're hot dry makes a difference as well.
yeah,
I remember when we toured India in 2007, they had 6 one-dayers and a T20 at the end, I think it was. And I remember I was collecting the heat data, and we had core temp pills and things like that. But the conditions when we arrived was something like 43 degrees, I think, down the south of India,
yeah,
but it was quite a dry humidity. It was about 30%. And I remember the last game was in Mumbai. It was 30 degrees, but it was about 70% humidity. And the players just said that was a lot harder to operate in than the 43 degrees, but with only 30% humidity. So humidity plays a massive role. With a rubbish bin bag over you, you're probably getting that humidity up. So it's probably probably getting a bit of heat stress with that. But yeah, you do have to be a little bit careful about how you do it as well, and you don't want to overdo it and stuff. So,
yeah.
yeah,
And I think that's probably especially these kind of studies, like they're done in controlled environments with things being monitored and people who know what they're doing. And yeah, it's probably in my opinion, and that would be my opinion. Like you're trying to create a very specific and kind of deliberate effect without monitoring anything and kind of guessing it. And could it potentially work? Maybe. Could it potentially also not work? Probably.
yeah. And the thing with those research studies, they all go through ethics committees, so that
Yeah.
we have very strict protocols on when we have to pull an athlete out and things like that as well. So
Yeah.
there's the safety margins in that. So
Yeah. Cool. There's a good myth, not busted, but answered.
yeah. Actually, one other thing, more recently, a few years ago now, but I sort of realised that with fast bowling, growing up, I just wanted to bowl fast, and I thought, and I know that the benefit of having a super fast bowler into a team is, it's gold. If you can get someone that can bowl 150k plus,
Yeah.
there's not too many around the world that can do that. But I think accuracy is really important, and I sort of, if you ask some of the coaches, if when a bowler tells you where they're going to pitch the delivery, how many times can they actually pitch it in that spot that they're going to tell you they're going to pitch it in?
Mm-hmm.
And if you ask the bowler, they'll probably say, "Oh, 4 out of 6 balls I can pitch at that particular length." Say a Yorker.
Yeah.
If you ask the bowling coach, they'll probably say maybe 2 out of 6. So sort of that disconnect in terms of where a bowler can bowl and where they think they can bowl. And that sort of led me to, and I was watching the bowling coaches, and they had a grid that they used to draw on a pen and paper, and they'd plot each ball where the bowler actually bowled. And I was looking at it and I was thinking, well, actually, after the piece that's missing is that they don't actually know where the bowler intended to bowl. And I know as a bowler myself, sometimes I'd be running into bowl a particular ball and I wouldn't quite land on the right spot. I might have got a wicket, but you take credit for it, but it wasn't actually where you intended to bowl.
Yeah.
And looking at these diagrams afterwards of what they'd collected, there was no way to see where the bowler actually intended. So I made up an app, and basically you ask the bowler at the end of the run-up as a bowling coach, where are you going to bowl? And then when they've actually bowled, you actually input where they actually did bowl. And then you get this bit of accountability in terms of, and it makes the bowler accountable for where they're bowling. They can see it, they can scroll back. And from my point of view as well, if we're doing research and we're trying to improve someone's bowling speed, we also want to make sure that we're not, negating their accuracy. So if we make the accuracy worse, there's no point in increasing your speed. So accuracy is really important, and you need to be able to control for that.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. And did you find that, I'm assuming from that, using the app and kind of having that deliberate almost focus on and that accountability, you found an improvement in accuracy?
Yeah, well, I think from my point of view, I developed the app to use as a sports scientist in terms of to use in research projects, so that, if you wanted to trial something, what's the effect of beta-alanine, for instance, on fast bowling performance, you could design a study, and then this could be the measure of tracking the accuracy during that study, something like that. You could also put bowling speeds in there and things like that as well. So, yeah.
Awesome. Very nice. Yeah. Any other bits you want to share?
Yeah, I think another thing I think that's really growing the game is the performance analysis side of the game as well. Mm-hmm. And I think there's lots of potential there as well for fast tracking knowledge. So fast bowlers and bowlers in general, they dictate the game in terms of a batter can only react to where the bowler bowls. Mm-hmm. So another app that we developed was called Cricket Playbook app. Unfortunately, it's not on the app sites anymore, but it was basically looking at the idea of if you had a pie chart and you bowled 100 deliveries at a particular type of delivery, so say a middle stump Yorker, where would they actually get hit to? So we basically used Champions Trophy data and plotted. I had a research summer student Rob Jennett that collected all the data and basically we sort of got all the stats for it, and then we turned it into an app. So you could select left or right-hand bowler, left or right-handed batter, type of bowler, and then you had a pitch map where you could place where the ball was, and then it would tell you the percentage around the field or which position it would tend to get hit to as a percentage. And then just by changing the length of the delivery, you could sort of see how the percentages change. And having a captain having that knowledge or fast tracking the knowledge of a captain as to where to set the field would be is quite beneficial, I think. So.
Yeah, and I think then kind of bringing those two things you've mentioned together of kind of the accuracy and then that if you can have kind of a bowler knowing that 50% of the time if they try and almost playing it a bit like battleships, they're trying to bowl it in slot A1. And then the captain knowing, well, there's a very good chance that that's going to go to X position, and actually having the stats to back that up. And I think like you see a lot of captains have that kind of intuition and that gut feel. But like you say, using and it will obviously be taking place in the highest level of teams, where they know there's a method behind the madness. But yeah, putting things in place to take the guesswork out. And I think from kind of being sports science nerds, which we are in this field, that's kind of the never-ending goal is how can you carry on giving cricketers the best possible chance to succeed, and that's ultimately the goal of what S&C is. It's never going to be the be-all and end-all, but you're giving yourself a better chance to be quicker, hit the ball further, and reduce your risk of injury.
I think that's important as well. It's like probably the major benefit of being fit and strong is that you're going to be on the field for longer. and be able to play the game for longer and more frequently. So, it's a very high percentage of fast bowlers that are injured at any particular time.
Yeah.
And the faster you bowl, the more injury risk you have, just because of the nature of the activity itself. So, it's very important to be conditioned well. The other thing with the bowler is, your role is to deceive the batter. So, work on those variations and that skill level of how you deliver the ball, and so that you can swing it and seam it, on demand if you can. And those variations on your slow ball and pace and stuff is also probably the thing that the consistency of being able to do those things, I think, is what distinguishes cricketers at different levels. So,
yeah, awesome. Is there one, or if it isn't possible to give one, maybe two or three? Is there 1 to 3 kind of key things that throughout your whole kind of amazing experience that you've had, and you've clearly got so much kind of under your belt, is there anything you think, especially amateur cricketers, could learn from the professional game, or from what you've found, that you almost look at a club side and you're almost screaming in your head, you should be doing this, or you need access to this information?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a tough one. I mean, everyone's goals and ambitions are different. So, you get out of the game what you put into the game. And that's like anything. The elites are the cream of the crop. So there's a very small number that are ever going to make to that level. But to play the best you can, you need to be prepared physically for the game. And that starts right from a young age, to be able to cope with demands of what you're going to prepare your body for. I think one of the most interesting studies I think I've been involved with was a study run by my supervisor, Professor David Pine, and also Professor Mark Portis. And what they did was that they brought in all the top bowlers around the country, so top state and international bowlers. But they also brought in the top under 14-year-olds, I think it was, around the country as well. So they had these two groups. You had this senior group that had made it, and then you had this junior group who were the talent spotted best up and comers. And they put them through a whole testing battery of all their anthropometry, so height, weight, skin folds, muscle mass, all these different measurements, limb lengths and girths and things. And then they put them through strength testing as well. And then they also basically took their bowling speeds as well in the indoor nets at the Institute of Sport in Canberra. And then they could make this comparison between what's the difference between a bowler that's bowling faster versus slower as a 14-year-old, and then the same thing with the group of senior bowlers. And then they can make the comparison between the junior cricketers and the senior cricketers. And I think you can read the research paper, but from memory, the distinguishing factors between the junior bowlers within that group was the upper body strength, whereas the distinguishing factors between the older bowlers was leg strength and power. So at a younger age, upper body strength. As you become more elite, it's your leg power.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that's, if I'm just kind of guessing off the back of that, it's and thinking about kind of the 14-year-olds I've worked with, there's a big disparity in upper body strength, and there's less kind of most of them are pretty like athletic and springy and strong, not strong but springy through the lower half, and then you get to the adults and they've all done their push-ups and they're all strong through the upper half, but down below and through the legs they're actually not actually that much better than all of the 14-year-olds.
Yeah, I think the other thing to mention as well is it's been done across a number of sports, cricket included, that some of the younger kids that develop earlier tend to get picked up by rep teams earlier. So if you wanted to be a fast bowler and you happen to be born earlier in the year or later in the year, depending where you are in the world, you potentially have a greater chance of making rep teams. And now there's studies trying to come up with unique ways of having a fairer playing field to pick those players up, because those
Yeah. 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 Mm. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Brilliant, brilliant piece of advice. Is there anything else you want to share, Carl, or is all good to wrap it up? No, all good. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you everybody who has watched this video. What I will do somewhere up here, I'll drop a link to the previous kind of podcast episode we did with Sibby, which is all around shoulder injuries in cricket. And Sibby has been supervised through his PhD by Carl. But for now, I will stop this and come back to you very shortly.